The shot cracked through the blizzard like the hand of God, reaching down to judge the wicked. Master Chief Jack Carter watched through his scope as the enemy commander, 800 meters away, protected behind reinforced concrete and 3 armed guards, dropped dead before the sound ever reached anyone's ears. The man simply ceased to exist. One moment barking orders into a radio, the next a corpse collapsing into blood-stained snow. Jack's blood turned to ice. Not from the cold, though the Rocky Mountain winter was merciless enough to kill a man in minutes. Not from fear, though his team was pinned down with 40-plus hostiles closing in from 3 sides. His blood froze because that shot was impossible. The angle, the wind, the distance, the conditions. Everything about it violated the laws of probability and physics. More than that, Jack knew that signature. He'd seen it before, 3 years ago. Before Lieutenant Sarah Monroe died on a frozen ridge while he ran away and left her to die alone. Who fired that shot? He demanded into his radio, his voice barely steady. Static. Then Petty Officer Marcus Webb's confused response. Chief, that came from our 6 o'clock. We don't have anyone there. Jack had been doing this work for 17 years. He knew the difference between lucky shots and impossible ones. He knew the signature of every sniper he'd ever worked with. And this shot, this perfect, surgical, devastating shot, belonged to someone who'd been dead since that frozen ridge. No, he whispered to himself, that's not possible. The mountain didn't care about possible. The mountain only cared about survival. And somewhere out there in the killing cold, a ghost was keeping them alive. 18 hours earlier, the mission had seemed clean, simple extraction, in and out before anyone knew they were there. The kind of operation Jack's SEAL team could run in their sleep. The briefing at Joint Base Lewis McChord had been routine. 8 operators, 1 scientist, hostile territory in the Colorado Rockies, where a domestic terror cell had been operating for 6 months. The target? Dr. Lisa Chen, a cryptographer whose brain contained secrets worth more than all their lives combined. She'd been kidnapped 3 days prior while consulting on a classified project. The terror cell wanted what she knew. The United States wanted her back before she broke. Light resistance expected, the intelligence officer had said. A woman in civilian clothes whose cold eyes suggested CIA. Maybe 6 to 8 hostiles. They're not expecting us. Quick in and out. Jack had learned long ago to trust his gut more than intelligence reports. His gut had been screaming that something was wrong. Orders were orders, and Dr. Chen was running out of time. His team loaded into 2 Black Hawks at 0300. Jack went through his pre-flight ritual, checking weapons and gear with the muscle memory of 2 decades. Around him, his team did the same. 7 men who'd become brothers through blood and fire. Marcus Webb, the team's tech specialist, 28 years old, brilliant with computers, deadly with a rifle. He had a wife and twin daughters waiting in Virginia Beach. Carlos Martinez, their medic, 32, stocky, with hands that could stop bleeding or break necks with equal efficiency. He'd saved Jack's life twice. Jack had lost count of how many times Martinez had saved the others. David Torres, point man, 26, the youngest, but with instincts that had kept them alive through situations that should have killed them all. Ray Chen, no relation to the target, breacher, 34, could open any door, bypass any lock, create or destroy any obstacle. Mike Sullivan, communications, 29, the quietest of them all, but his voice over the radio had guided them through hell more times than Jack wanted to remember. Tom Anderson, heavy weapons, 35, built like a tank, thought like a chess player. And Jake Wilson, the rookie, 24, this was his 3rd operation with the team, still trying to prove himself, still believing he was invincible. Jack knew better. He'd learned that everyone was mortal, everyone could die, even the best of them, especially the best of them. The helicopters flew low and fast through the night, following valleys to avoid radar. The pilots were artists, threading through mountain passes in the dark with night vision and nerve. Jack watched the terrain roll past below, rocky slopes and pine forests dusted with early winter snow. Somewhere out there, Dr. Chen was waiting, hoping, praying that someone was coming for her. They didn't know that someone else was watching too. Someone who'd been watching since that frozen ridge. Someone who'd made these mountains her kingdom of shadows and death. The insertion point was a clearing 2 clicks from the target. The Black Hawks touched down for exactly 15 seconds, just long enough for 8 seals to fast rope into knee-deep snow. Then the birds were gone, disappearing into the night sky, leaving nothing but rotor wash and silence. Jack took point. Behind him, his team moved in tactical formation, weapons ready, eyes scanning. 2 clicks through mountain forest in the dark. For SEAL team operators, it was a walk in the park. The compound appeared exactly where intelligence said it would be. An old mining facility, abandoned 20 years ago, now repurposed as a fortress. 3 buildings arranged in a triangle. Guard towers on 2 corners. Lights burning in windows despite the late hour. Jack glassed it through his scope. He counted 6 hostiles on patrol, maybe more inside. The intelligence had been accurate so far. His gut still screamed that something was wrong. "Spider, this is Reaper," he radioed, using his call sign. "We're in position. Compound as described. 6 external guards, proceeding with infiltration." "Copy, Reaper." The reply came from the command center back at Lewis McChord. "You're green lit. Bring her home." They moved in silence. Torres took point, leading them through the perimeter with the patience of a man who understood that speed meant nothing if you were dead. They bypassed the first guard tower, slipped past 2 patrol routes, and reached the main building without firing a shot. Chen, the breacher, went to work on the door. 30 seconds later, they were inside. The building was warmer than outside, but not by much. Old concrete walls, fluorescent lights that flickered and buzzed, the smell of diesel fuel in unwashed bodies. Jack's team flowed through the corridors like water, clearing rooms with practiced efficiency. They found Dr. Chen in a storage room on the 2nd floor. She was alive, terrified, but alive. Her eyes went wide when she saw them, relief and disbelief fighting for control of her expression. Martinez moved to her, gentle despite his bulk. "Dr. Chen, I'm Petty Officer Martinez, United States Navy. We're here to get you out. Are you injured?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "Okay, stay close to me. Do exactly what I say. We're going home." The extraction should have been clean. They had Dr. Chen. They'd encountered minimal resistance. The path back to the extraction point was clear. Jack's gut was still screaming. They made it to the vehicles they'd staged near the compound. 2 trucks, engines running, ready for a quick exit. Dr. Chen climbed into the 2nd truck with Martinez and Wilson. Jack took the lead vehicle with the rest of the team. "Spider, this is Reaper," Jack radioed. "Package secured. Moving to extraction point Charlie. ETA 15 minutes. "Copy, Reaper. Birds are en route. See you in 15. They drove fast on dirt roads that wound through the mountains. Jack kept his eyes on the mirrors, watching for pursuit. Behind them, the compound was quiet. No alarms, no lights, no response. Too quiet. The RPG hit 12 feet from Jack's truck, and the world became noise and fire and flying debris. The lead vehicle swerved hard, almost rolling. Jack's head slammed against the doorframe. Stars exploded in his vision. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard weapons fire. Lots of weapons fire. "Contact! Contact! We're hit!" Jack kicked open his door and rolled into the snow, rifle coming up even as his brain tried to process what was happening. Behind them, the 2nd truck was intact, but stopped. Ahead of them, muzzle flashes lit up the tree line on both sides of the road. This wasn't light resistance. This was a kill box. This was an ambush designed specifically for them. "Spider, this is Reaper," Jack shouted into his radio. "We are in heavy contact. I repeat, heavy contact. Multiple hostiles, RPGs. We need immediate air support. Reaper, Spider copies. QRF is 30 minutes out. Birds are turning around. Hold your position. 30 minutes. They'd all be dead in 30 minutes. Another RPG screamed past, impacting behind them. Jack pressed himself against the frozen embankment, rifle clutched to his chest. Around him, his team was taking cover, returning fire, badly outnumbered and pinned down. "Sound off!" Jack barked. The responses came rapid fire. Webb, Martinez, Torres, Chen, Sullivan, Anderson, Wilson. 7 voices, everyone still breathing. For now. "How many?" Jack demanded. "I count at least 30, Webb shouted back. 3 heavy machine gun positions. Multiple RPG teams. Chief, this is bad." Bad didn't cover it. They'd walked into a trap. Someone had known they were coming. Someone had known their route, their timing, their numbers. Someone had fed the enemy every detail they needed to turn a simple extraction into a massacre. "Someone sold us out," Jack said, but the words were lost in the thunder of gunfire. He scanned the terrain through his scope, trying to find an angle, any advantage they could exploit. The enemy had superior numbers, superior position, and they were coordinated. This wasn't random militia. This was professional. Machine gun fire raked across their position. Jack ducked as bullets tore chunks out of the frozen ground inches from his head. Behind him, Dr. Chen was screaming. Martinez was trying to keep her calm, but his eyes were wide. They all knew what this was. This was how they died. "Chief!" Torres shouted. "Movement on our 6. They're flanking." Of course they were flanking. Why wouldn't they? The enemy had them exactly where they wanted them. All they had to do was close the trap and wait for the Americans to run out of ammunition. Or hope, whichever came first. Jack's mind raced through options. Every scenario ended with body bags. They couldn't advance. The enemy had the high ground and superior firepower. They couldn't retreat. The road behind them was already cut off. They couldn't hold. Ammunition was finite, and they were burning through it fast. 30 minutes until support arrived. 30 minutes might as well have been 30 years. "Chief!" Webb's voice had an edge Jack had never heard before. Fear. Real fear. "What's the play?" Jack didn't have an answer. For the first time in 17 years, he had no plan, no strategy, no brilliant maneuver that would save them all. They were going to die here in the snow, and there was nothing he could do about it. That's when the shot came. Different from the chaos around them. Different from the wild spray of automatic fire and the thunder of RPGs. This was surgical, precise, perfect. 800 meters to the northeast, the enemy commander collapsed like a puppet with severed strings. The man who'd been directing the entire assault, protected by concrete barriers and surrounded by guards, simply dropped dead. For a moment, even the enemy seemed confused. The gunfire actually paused, everyone trying to understand what had just happened. Jack's head snapped around, scanning for the shooter. His team was pinned down, heads low, weapons oriented toward the enemy positions to the north and east. None of them had line of sight to the commander's position. None of them could have made that shot. "What the hell?" Webb breathed. "Who fired that shot?" Jack demanded. Static. Then Webb again. "Chief, that came from our 6 o'clock. We don't have anyone there." Jack felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. 17 years of combat experience, hundreds of missions. He knew weapons. He knew shooters. He knew the signature of every sniper he'd ever worked with. And he knew this shot. Knew it the way you know a voice you haven't heard in years, but could never forget. That was impossible. She was dead. He'd watched them lower the flag-draped coffin into the ground. He'd accepted the folded flag from the honor guard. He'd spent 1,000 days carrying the weight of leaving her behind. Sarah Monroe was dead. His radio crackled. Not the standard frequency. This was old, something that shouldn't even be active anymore. An encryption protocol that had been retired when its primary user was declared killed in action. The signal was weak, barely there. The pattern was unmistakable. 3 short bursts, 2 long, 1 short. A path marker. Sarah's path marker. Jack's hands were shaking. He pulled out his GPS unit with trembling fingers. The signal was there, blinking on the screen, directing them somewhere specific. A route through the frozen forest to their east. A route that avoided the obvious paths where the enemy would be waiting. The route showed safe ground, natural cover, terrain that shouldn't be navigable but somehow was. No one could have this intelligence without real-time observation from an elevated position, without intimate knowledge of this specific area, without years of studying every inch of these mountains. Is someone guiding us? Dr. Chen asked, her scientific mind temporarily overriding her terror. Yes, Jack said, then more quietly to himself, someone who's supposed to be dead. Another shot cracked through the night, a different angle. The shooter had repositioned across hundreds of meters of brutal terrain in less than 60 seconds. The round found the heavy weapons specialist who'd been setting up an RPG on their eastern flank. The man dropped without a sound. Contact, Anderson shouted, spinning toward the new angle. Contact our... Wait, that came from behind us too. Then who the hell is shooting? Wilson demanded, his young voice cracking with stress. Jack's radio crackled again on that old frequency. Still no voice, just another signal, another path marker. This one more urgent. Move now. He made a decision that went against every tactical principle he'd ever learned. He was going to trust a ghost. Everyone, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. We follow the GPS route, single file, 5-meter intervals. Watch where I step and step exactly where I do. We move in 30 seconds. Chief, Webb started, that route goes through. I know where it goes, and I know who's guiding us. Chief, Lieutenant Monroe died on that ridge. Jack met his eyes. Did she? The question hung in the frozen air. Around them, the gunfire continued. The enemy was reorganizing, getting ready for another push. They had maybe 2 minutes before the trap closed completely. I'm giving you a direct order, Jack said. We take that route. Now. SEAL teams follow orders. More than that, they trust their chief. If Jack Carter said to follow a dead woman's guidance through a frozen death trap, then that's what they do. Let's move, Jack commanded. They moved in formation, Jack on point, following the GPS signal like a man following a prayer. Behind him, 6 operators and 1 terrified scientist navigated terrain that should have been impassable. Yet somehow, every step found solid ground. Every turn avoided ambush positions. Every meter brought them further from the kill zone and closer to something that might be safety. Behind them, the enemy was in chaos. Jack could hear it over the radio chatter they were intercepting. Their commander was dead. Their communications specialist was dead. Half their squad leaders were dead. No one was coordinating the pursuit. That was Sarah's work. That was how she fought. Not with overwhelming force, but with surgical precision. Remove the brain, and the body flounders. Another shot, then another. Each one found its mark. Each one delivered death from impossible distances in impossible conditions. The enemy patrol that had been trying to flank them dropped one by one, picked off by a shooter they couldn't see, couldn't find, couldn't stop. Jesus Christ, Martinez breathed. How was she doing this? Jack knew how. He'd watched her work for 2 years before that final mission. Sarah Monroe wasn't just a sniper, she was an artist. Each shot was part of a larger composition, a symphony of controlled violence that dismantled enemy forces with methodical precision. She'd called it pruning, cutting away the branches of command until the tree collapsed on its own. Jack had seen her clear rooms from 800 meters out, picking off targets through window frames with shots that defied probability. Had seen her hold an extraction point for 9 hours straight, her rifle never cooling, her concentration never breaking. Had seen her do things that made other snipers question their career choices. and he'd seen her stay behind when she should have run, seen her sacrifice herself so the rest of them could live, seen her choose death so others could choose life. Except she hadn't died. Somehow, impossibly, she'd survived. And for 1,000 days, she'd been out here in these mountains, alone, fighting a war no one knew was happening. The GPS signal pulsed again, a new direction. Jack adjusted course without hesitation. His team followed without question. They traveled nearly a kilometer through terrain that shouldn't have been passable. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit had faded. The enemy had given up or been eliminated. Either way, they were no longer being chased. The radio crackled one more time. This time there were actual words. A woman's voice, harder than he remembered, colder but unmistakably hers. Ambush 200 meters northeast. 4 hostiles. Wait! Jack held up his fist. The team froze instantly. No one breathed. No one moved. Copy, Jack whispered into his radio, barely audible. A pause. Then, you always followed orders poorly. I said wait, not whisper like an idiot. Despite everything, despite the cold and the danger and the impossibility of this moment, Jack felt himself smile. That sarcasm, that edge, that was Sarah. 4 shots rang out in rapid succession, each one precise, each one final. Clear, Sarah's voice said. Move quickly. Reinforcements 3 minutes out. They moved. Dr. Chen was struggling now, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving only exhaustion and terror. Martinez caught her when she stumbled, practically carrying her forward. I can't, she gasped. I can't keep going. You can, Jack said firmly, and you will. Your legs will work until I tell them to stop. Move. She moved. Because there wasn't another option. Because Jack's voice carried the weight of command and certainty, even when he felt neither. The GPS led them to a ridge overlooking a small valley. Below, Jack could see a natural choke point, the only path the reinforcements could take to reach their position. She's funneling them, Webb realized, setting up a kill box, with us as bait. Not bait, Jack corrected. Protected assets. She's not using us, she's covering us. The first wave of reinforcements appeared in the valley below. 20 men, moving fast, weapons ready, scanning for targets. They never saw it coming. The first shot dropped the lead man. The second shot dropped the man behind him. The third, fourth, and fifth shots came so fast they almost seemed like a single sound. The remaining 7 men dove for cover, firing wildly at a shooter they couldn't see. There was no cover in that valley. That's why Sarah had chosen it. Every rock, every tree, every piece of terrain had a clear line of sight from her position, wherever that position was. One by one they fell. 7 shots, 7 kills, 32 seconds. Jack had seen a lot of killing in his career. He'd done plenty himself. This was different. This wasn't combat. This was execution, methodical, impersonal, absolute. She's not the same, Martinez said quietly. Whatever she was before, that's not who she is now. Jack watched the last body fall. 1,000 days alone will change anyone. The radio crackled. Move now. Safe house 1 click northeast. Follow the markers. They moved. The safe house was a cave system carved into the mountainside, invisible from the air, defended by natural choke points that would turn any assault into suicide. Inside, they found evidence of long-term habitation, food stores, water collection systems, weapons caches, maps covering every inch of the surrounding territory. Dozens of red X marks indicated eliminated targets. She's been here the whole time, Webb said, examining the maps. Each one marked with enemy positions, patrol routes, supply lines. This isn't survival. This is war. One woman against an entire enemy network, Anderson agreed. For 36 months. Jack found a journal near a makeshift desk. The entries were sparse, clinical, but they told a story of unimaginable resilience. Day 47. Established observation post overlooking eastern approach. Enemy uses this route for supply runs every third day. Predictable. Day 183. Eliminated enemy commanders suspected of ordering torture protocols. 3 rounds, 1,100 meters, wind compensation 3.4 MOA. Day 412. Intercepted communications suggesting American operation in sector. Will observe and provide support if necessary. Day 847. They came. Carter's team. Finally, after all this time, finally, Jack's hands trembled as he read that last entry. She'd been waiting for him to come back, waiting in hell, hoping that someday someone would give her a reason to stop fighting. "Chief," Martinez said softly, "you need to hear this." He was holding the radio. Sarah's voice was coming through, and for the first time, it didn't sound calm. It sounded human, vulnerable, almost afraid. 30-plus enemy reinforcements converging on your position. They know where the safe house is. They've always known. A pause. "I made a mistake. I thought I had more time." Jack grabbed the radio. Sarah, where are you?" "That doesn't matter right now. What matters is you have approximately 15 minutes before they reach you." Another pause. "There's a back exit. Follow the tunnel until you reach the ridge. I've marked an extraction point 2 clicks east. Your helicopter can approach from there." "And what about you?" Silence. "Sarah, what about you?" "I'm going to do what I've been doing, Jack. I'm going to prune the tree. By the time you reach extraction, there won't be anyone left to follow you. That's 30-plus hostiles. You can't. I've killed more than that this week alone. Trust me." Her voice softened slightly. "Go. I'm not leaving you again. You're not running. You're completing the mission. You're protecting the asset." "That's what you do, Jack. That's what we both do." A pause. "I didn't survive 1,000 days just to watch you die because you got sentimental. Take your team. Take the scientist. Get out. I'll find my own way." "Like last time?" The words hung in the air, heavy with guilt and grief. "Last time I chose to stay," Sarah said quietly. "This time I'm choosing to come back. First, I have to finish this. There are men out there who know my location now. Men who've been hunting me. If I don't eliminate them, they'll keep hunting. They'll never stop." "So you're going to kill all of them?" "That's exactly what I'm going to do." Jack stood frozen, the weight of the past pressing down on him. Around him, his team waited. Dr. Chen waited. The clock was ticking. "Just come back," he said finally. "That's all I ask." "I always come back, Jack. That's the problem. Coming back is easy." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Staying away is hard." The line went dead. Jack looked at the tunnel, the exit, the path to safety. Then he looked back at the maps, the journals, years of one woman's private war. "Chief," Webb's voice was gentle. "What do we do?" Jack picked up his rifle, checked his ammunition, set his jaw. "We move. We take the tunnel. We get to extraction." He turned to face his team. "And Sarah Monroe just told us she's coming home. I'm going to make damn sure there's a home for her to come back to." They moved into the tunnel. Behind them, somewhere in the frozen darkness, a ghost prepared for her final hunt. And somewhere in the mountains, 30-plus enemy soldiers had no idea that death was already watching them through a rifle scope, counting their heartbeats, waiting for the perfect moment to add 30 more red X marks to a map that had become her entire world. The war was ending. For Sarah Monroe, the war had never really ended. It had just been waiting for the right moment to finish what had started on that frozen ridge. Tonight, in the frozen hell of the Rocky Mountains, that moment had finally arrived. The tunnel swallowed them whole. Jack led the way, his flashlight cutting through darkness so complete it felt like drowning in ink. Behind him, 6 operators and 1 terrified scientist moved in single file, their breathing loud in the confined space, their footsteps echoing off ancient stone. The tunnel wasn't natural. Someone had widened it, reinforced the weak points, created a pathway through the mountain that hadn't existed before. Tool marks scored the walls, recent ones, deliberate ones. Sarah had built this, built it alone, built it in preparation for a day that might never come. "How long has she been planning this?" Webb whispered, running his hand along the carved stone. "Every day," Jack replied, his voice tight. "Every hour since that ridge, preparing for anyone who might need it." The tunnel sloped downward, then curved sharply left. Jack consulted his GPS. The signal was still active, still guiding them. Even now, Sarah was watching, protecting, ensuring they made it out alive. Dr. Chen stumbled. Martinez caught her before she hit the ground. "I can't see anything," she gasped. "I can't." "You don't need to see," Martinez said, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man built like a tank. "You just need to walk, one foot in front of the other. That's all." "How can she be so calm?" Dr. Chen's voice cracked. "How can she talk about killing 30 people like she's ordering coffee?" Martinez was quiet for a moment. "Because she's been doing it for years, ma'am. And because right now, her being good at killing is the only reason we're still breathing." Above them, muffled by rock and earth, the first explosion echoed through the mountain. Then another, then a third. The sound rolled through the tunnel like distant thunder. "She's engaging," Torres said quietly. "She's winning," Jack corrected. "There's a difference." The explosions continued. Not random, systematic. Each one placed for maximum effect. Each one part of a larger plan that Sarah had probably been designing for months, maybe years. This wasn't a desperate last stand. This was an execution. A final accounting for survival, enrage, and loneliness compressed into one night of surgical violence. Jack kept moving. The tunnel narrowed here, forcing them to turn sideways, backs scraping against stone. Claustrophobia clawed at the edges of his mind, but he pushed it down. He'd survived worse. They all had. The radio crackled. Sarah's voice barely audible over the sound of distant gunfire. 23 down, 11 remaining. They're trying to retreat." A pause. "I'm not allowing that." "Sarah, let them go," Jack said into his radio. "You've done enough." "No, I haven't." Her voice was ice, clinical, completely detached from the violence she was inflicting. "These men know my location. They've seen my face. If any of them survive, they'll talk. They'll send more. The hunting will never stop." "So you're going to kill all of them?" "That's exactly what I'm going to do." Another shot. Jack could hear it through the radio, sharp and final. 24. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that enough was enough, that there was a line somewhere that didn't need to be crossed. He'd left her on that ridge. He'd run while she covered their retreat. He'd lived while she disappeared into these mountains. He'd mourned while she survived. He didn't have the right to tell her when to stop. "Just come back when it's done," he said quietly. "That's all I ask." "I always come back, Jack. That's the problem." Her voice softened, just for a moment. "Coming back is easy. Staying away is hard." The line went dead again. The tunnel began to slope upward. Fresh air reached Jack's lungs, carrying the faint smell of pine and gunpowder. They were close to the exit, close to extraction, close to safety. Safety meant leaving Sarah behind again, and Jack didn't know if he could do that twice. "Chief," Webb said from behind him, "when we get out, what happens to her?" Jack kept walking. "We extract. We go home." "That's not what I mean," Webb's voice was careful. "She's been declared KIA for years. She's been operating alone without authorization. Someone's going to want answers. Someone's going to want to know how she survived, why she didn't make contact, what she's been doing all this time. Those questions can wait until she's safe." "Can they?" Webb pressed. "You know how this works, Chief. The brass will want debriefs. The intel community will want interrogations. Someone's going to look at what she's done and ask whether she went native, whether she can be trusted, whether she's still one of us, or if she's become something else. Jack stopped walking, turned to face Webb in the darkness. I trust her with my life. I've trusted her with my life multiple times, and she's never let me down. If the brass has questions about her loyalty, they can question mine first. They will, Chief. You know they will. Good. Let them. The tunnel opened onto a narrow ridge overlooking the eastern valley. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. In the distance, the safe house was burning. Orange flames climbed toward the sky, consuming years of solitude and survival. Jack raised his binoculars. Bodies littered the ground around the burning structure. Vehicles were destroyed. Enemy soldiers were scattered across the snow, some running, some shooting at shadows, all of them dying. I count 18 down, Anderson reported, scanning with his own scope. Another shot cracked through the cold air. Another body fell. 19. Jack watched through his binoculars, trying to spot Sarah, trying to catch even a glimpse of the woman who'd saved their lives. There was nothing, no muzzle flash, no movement, just death delivered from invisible distances. How is she doing this? Martinez breathed. One person against 30-plus trained fighters. She's not one person anymore, Jack said quietly. She's 1,000 days of anger and grief and survival. She's every moment she thought about giving up and didn't. She's every night she spent alone wondering if anyone was coming back for her. He lowered his binoculars. She's not fighting them. She's punishing them. The radio crackled again. 23 down, 11 remaining. They're dug in. I can't penetrate from this angle. A pause. I need to reposition. 15 minutes. We don't have 15 minutes, Jack said. The helicopter's almost here. Then you'll have to wait. Sarah, wait for me, Jack. Her voice cracked. Just slightly. The first real sign of humanity she'd shown since the engagement began. Please, just wait. Jack closed his eyes. Years ago, he hadn't waited. Years ago, he'd followed orders and led his team to safety while Sarah held the line and died. Except she hadn't died. She'd survived, and she'd spent 1,000 days waiting for someone to come back for her. We'll wait, he promised, however long it takes. Thank you. A long pause, static and breathing. I need to go silent now, radio discipline, but I'll be there, I promise. The line went dead. Martinez was watching Jack with an expression he couldn't quite read. You love her, he said quietly. Jack turned. What? Lieutenant Monroe, you love her. That's why you never stopped looking. That's why you couldn't give up. Jack didn't respond immediately. The question hung in the cold air between them. She was the best operator I ever worked with, he said finally. That's not all she was. Martinez fell into step beside him as they moved toward the extraction point. I'm not judging, Chief. I'm just saying be careful. Years change people. The woman who comes out of those mountains might not be the woman you remember. I know. Do you? Martinez's voice was gentle but firm. Because right now, you're looking at her like she's still Lieutenant Sarah Monroe. What she's doing back there, methodically executing every person who knows her face, that's not the behavior of someone who stayed the same. She's doing what she has to do. Maybe, or maybe she's forgotten how to stop. Jack didn't have an answer for that, because deep down he knew Martinez might be right. They reached the extraction point 15 minutes later. The helicopter was already visible on the horizon, its lights blinking against the brightening sky. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio. Reaper, this is Nightbird. We have you visual. ETA 3 minutes. Copy, Nightbird. Standing by. Jack raised his binoculars again, scanning the terrain behind them. No sign of Sarah. No movement. No silence. Radio silence. 2 minutes. Still nothing. 1 minute. Jack's heart was pounding. Where was she? The engagement had ended 20 minutes ago. She should be here by now. Chief, Torres said suddenly. Contact, 2 o'clock. Tree line. Jack spun, rifle raised, finger on the trigger. A figure emerged from the trees, moving slowly, deliberately, like someone operating on the last fumes of adrenaline and willpower, covered in ghillie suit material that made her almost invisible against the frozen ground. Sarah Monroe walked out of the darkness like a ghost rising from hell. "Last 4 are down," she said simply. Her voice was flat, empty. 34 total. It's done. Jack lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking. His eyes were burning. "You came back." "I told you I would." She stopped a few feet away, swaying slightly. The adrenaline was wearing off. Without it, she was barely standing. Her ghillie suit was torn in places, burned in others. Her face was streaked with dirt and smoke and what might have been blood. "Is that the helicopter?" she asked. "Yeah." "Good." She took one more step and her legs buckled. Jack caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing. Years of survival rations and constant movement had stripped away everything except muscle and bone and willpower. "I've got you," he said. "I know." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You always did." The helicopter landed in a storm of snow and noise. The team loaded quickly. Dr. Chen first, then Torres, Anderson, Sullivan, Wilson. Webb grabbed Sarah's other arm, and together they carried her toward the open door. She stopped at the threshold. "Wait," she said. "Sarah, we need to go." "Just wait," she turned, looking back at the mountains, at the burning safe house in the distance, at the landscape that had been her prison and her kingdom for 1,000 days. "Goodbye," she whispered, "and good riddance." Then she let them lift her into the helicopter, and the door closed behind her. They were airborne 30 seconds later. Jack sat next to Sarah as the bird climbed towards safety. She closed her eyes the moment she sat down, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping. Her jaw was too tight, her breathing too controlled. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "I'm thinking about the last time I was in a helicopter leaving a mission." She didn't open her eyes. Different helicopter, different extraction point, same feeling. "What feeling?" "Like I'm dreaming, like none of this is real. Like I'm going to wake up back in that cave, alone, and realize the rescue was just another fantasy I invented to keep myself sane." Jack reached over and took her hand. She flinched at the contact. Years without human touch had made her wary. She didn't pull away. "This is real," he said. "I'm real. You're coming home." Home. She said the word like she was testing it, like she'd forgotten what it meant. "I don't know what that means anymore, Jack. I don't know who I am when I'm not hunting. Don't know how to exist when there's no one trying to kill me." "You'll figure it out." "Will I?" She finally opened her eyes. He saw something in them he'd never seen before. Fear. Not the fear of death. She'd made peace with that long ago. The fear of life. The fear of existing in a world that had moved on without her. "I killed 34 people tonight," she said quietly. "Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Because after being hunted, I wanted them to know what it felt like." Her voice dropped even lower. "Does that make me a monster?" "It makes you human," Jack said. "A human who's been through something no one should have to survive." That's a diplomatic answer. It's an honest answer. Jack squeezed her hand. "You did what you had to do. You survived. You came back. That's what matters." "Is it?" She looked down at their intertwined fingers. "I've spent years being a weapon, Jack. Years with no purpose except destruction. I don't know how to be anything else anymore." "Then we'll figure that out together. You're not alone anymore, Sarah. Whatever comes next, you're not facing it by yourself." She was quiet for a long moment. The helicopter hummed around them. Outside, the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the frozen landscape in shades of gold and pink. "Together," she finally repeated. "I'd forgotten what that word felt like." "You'll remember." "Promise?" Jack smiled. "I don't make promises. I make intentions. And my intention is to spend however long it takes reminding you." Something shifted in her expression. Something that might have been hope. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." She closed her eyes again. This time her breathing slowed. Her grip on his hand relaxed, and she finally let herself drift into something like sleep. For the first time in years, Sarah Monroe slept without one hand on her rifle. Slept without listening for footsteps, or gunfire, or danger. Slept with the knowledge that someone was watching over her for a change. The helicopter banked toward friendly territory, carrying its cargo of survivors toward a dawn that finally felt like a beginning instead of an end. Behind them, the mountains burned, and somewhere in the ashes of 34 graves, a war had finally ended. Deep in the intelligence networks that spanned the globe, another war was just beginning, because someone had sold Jack's team out. Someone had known exactly where they'd be and when they'd be there. Someone had turned a simple extraction into a massacre, and Sarah Monroe had spent years gathering evidence about who that someone was. The helicopter touched down at Joint Base Lewis McChord as the sun climbed higher. Jack was the first one out, followed by his team in rapid succession. Sarah came last, stepping onto the tarmac with the careful deliberation of someone who'd forgotten what stable ground felt like. She squinted against the morning sun, her hand instinctively moving toward a rifle that was no longer strapped to her body. "Easy," Jack said quietly. "You're safe here." "Safe." She repeated the word like it was in a foreign language. "I don't remember what that feels like." A medical team was already rushing toward them. When they reached for Sarah, she stepped back so fast she nearly fell. "Don't touch me." "Ma'am, you need medical attention." "I said don't touch me." Her voice was ice. "I've been handling my own wounds for years. I'll continue to do so." Jack intervened before the situation could escalate. "Give her space. She'll submit to medical when she's ready." "Chief, protocol requires—" "Protocol can wait." He turned to Sarah. "You do need to be checked out. You're running on empty, and whatever's kept you going this long is about to crash." Sarah stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, sharply. "Fine, but I choose the doctor, and I want a full debriefing scheduled for 1400 hours. There are things your intelligence community needs to hear." Colonel James Harrison, the base commander, stepped forward carefully. He was a tall man in his 50s, with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades making hard decisions. "Lieutenant Monroe, I don't think you understand the position you're in. You've been declared dead for years. You've been operating without authorization in—" "I understand my position perfectly, Colonel." Sarah's voice could have frozen the tarmac. "I understand that while I was fighting a war to keep American operations safe, someone in your intelligence apparatus was selling those operations to the enemy. I understand that good men died because of that leak. I understand that I have years of evidence about enemy operations, communications protocols, and command structures that your analysts would kill to access." She stepped closer to Harrison. "So I suggest you stop worrying about my authorization status and start worrying about the traitor in your midst." Harrison's face went red. "Now listen here, Colonel." Jack's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of 17 years of combat experience. "Lieutenant Monroe just killed 34 enemy combatants to get us out alive. Whatever questions you have can wait until she's rested and medically cleared. Push her now, and I guarantee you won't like the results." For a moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Harrison backed down. 1400 hours, he said stiffly. "Briefing room 1. Don't be late." He turned and walked away, his staff scrambling to follow. Sarah watched him go with eyes that missed nothing. "He's nervous," she said quietly. "Did you see how he reacted when I mentioned the mole?" "He's not the traitor," Jack said. "He doesn't have the composure for it." "Maybe not. He knows something." She turned to Jack. "The mole is here, Jack, on this base or connected to it. They knew about your mission because someone here told them." "That's a serious accusation." "It's a fact. I intercepted the communication myself 18 months ago. The intelligence came from this sector, from someone with access to operational planning. Her jaw tightened. I just need to find out who. Jack looked at the base around them. Hundreds of personnel, dozens of departments. Any one of them could be compromised. How do you plan to do that? Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. By watching, listening, waiting, the same way I've been doing it for years. The medical examination took 2 hours. Sarah submitted to it with barely concealed impatience, answering questions in monosyllables and refusing to elaborate on injuries that clearly had stories behind them. The doctor, a Navy captain named Rodriguez, documented everything with professional detachment. Multiple healed fractures, evidence of at least 3 gunshot wounds that had been self-treated, malnutrition, chronic dehydration, muscle damage consistent with extreme physical stress over an extended period, and psychological indicators that concerned her deeply. Chief Carter, Rodriguez said when she found Jack waiting outside, that woman has been in survival mode for years. The human mind isn't built for that. Whatever kept her going, it's not going to shut off just because she's technically safe now. What are you saying? I'm saying she needs psychiatric evaluation before any debriefing. I'm saying the things she's experienced have changed her in ways that might not be obvious at first glance. Rodriguez lowered her voice. I'm saying you need to be careful. Noted. The debriefing happens at 1400 as scheduled. She has information that could save lives. Information is useless if the person delivering it isn't stable enough to be believed. Then let me worry about that, Jack said. Is she cleared for duty? Rodriguez hesitated. Physically, barely. Mentally? She shook her head. That's above my pay grade. Jack found Sarah sitting on the edge of the examination table, staring at nothing. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the sterile environment and harsh lighting. The ghillie suit had been replaced with standard fatigues, and without it, she seemed almost fragile. Hey, he said softly. She didn't look up. The doctor thinks I'm crazy. The doctor thinks you've been through something traumatic. There's a difference. Is there? Sarah finally met his eyes. I killed 34 people last night without hesitation. I've been killing for years without hesitation. At what point does survival become something else? At the point where you start enjoying it. Who says I didn't? The words hung in the air between them. Jack searched her face for some sign that she was joking, testing him, anything other than serious. He found nothing. Sarah, there was a moment last night, she interrupted, when I was picking them off one by one, when I could see their fear, their confusion, their desperate attempts to find cover that didn't exist. Her voice was flat, emotionless. I felt something, Jack. Not satisfaction, not pride, something. What? Power. She looked down at her hands. For years I was prey, hunted, hiding, surviving on scraps and shadows. Last night, I was the predator. I was the thing they feared. And part of me, a bigger part than I want to admit, loved it. Jack sat down next to her. That's not crazy, Sarah. That's human. After what you went through, anyone would feel the same way. Would they? Would you? I don't know. I've never had to survive alone for years. I know you. I know who you are underneath all the scar tissue, and that person isn't a monster. You keep saying that like it's simple, like it's just survival. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. Do you know how many people I killed before last night? 87. I kept count, every single one. Names when I could learn them, faces when I could see them. 87 human beings who had families and dreams and lives, and I ended all of them. They were enemies. They were people. She stood up abruptly, moving to the window. Enemies, yes. People. I used to believe there was a line, a clear division between us and them, between justified killing and murder. After 87 bodies, the line gets blurry. After years alone with nothing but your rifle and your conscience, the line disappears entirely. Jack rose and moved to stand behind her. The fact that you're wrestling with this means you haven't lost yourself. Monsters don't question what they've done. Monsters don't keep count. Or maybe monsters are just very good at pretending to have consciences. She turned to face him. I need you to understand something, Jack. The woman you knew, she's gone. I'm what's left. And I don't know if what's left is worth saving. That's not your call to make. Isn't it? No. Jack took her hands in his. You saved my life again. You saved my entire team. You've been protecting American operations for years without recognition, without support, without anyone even knowing you were alive. That's not the action of someone who isn't worth saving. That's the action of a hero. Heroes don't enjoy killing. Heroes do what has to be done, regardless of how it makes them feel. He squeezed her hands. You're not a monster, Sarah. You're a survivor. And survivors carry scars. That's just the price of living. She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly some of the tension left her shoulders. The debriefing is in 2 hours, she said quietly. I need to prepare. I'll be right there with you. I know. The ghost of a smile crossed her face. That's the only reason I'm doing it. The briefing room filled quickly. Jack counted 18 people around the long conference table. Intelligence officers from 3 different agencies, their suits and clearance badges marking them as career professionals who dealt in secrets. Military brass from every branch, stars and eagles on their shoulders reflecting decades of service, and one woman in civilian clothes whose cold demeanor screamed CIA louder than any identification ever could. Victoria Hayes, Deputy Director of Intelligence, 45 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that cataloged everything and revealed nothing. She sat at the head of the table, flanked by Colonel Harrison and 2 assistants who typed furiously on encrypted laptops. Sarah stood at the front of the room, a laptop connected to the main display behind her. She'd refused to sit, refused the water they offered, refused everything except the opportunity to speak. Her posture was military perfect, but Jack could see the exhaustion in the tight lines around her eyes. She was running on fumes and willpower, nothing else. Before I begin, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the murmured conversations like a blade through silk, I want to make something clear. I'm not here to justify my actions over the past years. I'm not here to answer questions about my unauthorized operations or my failure to make contact. I'm here because there's a traitor in American intelligence, and if you don't find them, more people are going to die. The room went silent, completely, utterly silent. Jack could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents, could hear someone's watch ticking 3 seats away, could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his chest. Sarah pressed a button and a map appeared on the screen behind her. The Rocky Mountain region, marked with dozens of red pins, each one representing something. Jack wasn't sure he wanted to know what. I was part of an operation in the Hindu Kush Mountains. The mission was classified then and remains classified now. What matters is that it went wrong. We were compromised before we ever set foot on the ground. The enemy knew we were coming. They knew our route, our timing, our numbers. They were waiting for us. She paused, letting that sink in. I was captured during the ambush, held for 6 weeks before I escaped. During that time, I learned things about how the enemy operates, specifically how they acquire intelligence about American military movements. Another button press. A complex diagram appeared showing communication intercepts, timing analysis, correlation patterns that Jack couldn't begin to understand. Several intelligence officers leaned forward, their expressions shifting from skepticism to interest. Over the following years, I conducted surveillance on enemy communications in this sector. I documented patterns, I identified sources, and I reached a conclusion that I reported 18 months ago through a dead drop that I knew was still active. What conclusion? Victoria Hayes asked, her voice calm and controlled. Sarah's eyes swept the room, landing briefly on each face before moving on. That there is a highly placed source within American intelligence providing the enemy with operational details, mission timing, personnel assignments, extraction routes. Someone in this room, or connected to it, is a traitor. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Voices rose in protest. Harrison's face went purple. Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood, pointing fingers, demanding explanations. Only Victoria Hayes remained perfectly still, her expression unchanged, her hands folded calmly on the table in front of her. Jack watched her carefully. That stillness, that control, it was either the mark of innocence or the product of decades of training in deception. He couldn't tell which. "That's a serious accusation, Lieutenant," Victoria said calmly, cutting through the chaos. "I assume you have evidence?" "I have years of evidence." Sarah pulled up a series of documents on the screen. Communications intercepts, pattern analysis, correlation between compromised operations and personnel with access to relevant intelligence. She paused, her finger hovering over the laptop. "I have dates, times, content. I have proof that someone fed the enemy information about at least 17 operations over the past 2 years. And you kept this to yourself?" "I tried to report it," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "The dead drop I mentioned. Someone received my message. The confirmation protocol was activated. Nothing changed. Operations kept being compromised. Good men kept dying." Her eyes locked onto Victoria Hayes. Either my warning was ignored, or it was suppressed by the very person I was warning about. "Who received the dead drop message?" Jack asked, already knowing the answer would matter more than anything else said in this room. Sarah pulled up another document, a personnel roster, access logs, times and dates stamped in military precision. The confirmation came from this facility, from someone with access to secure communications in the intelligence section. She looked directly at Harrison. "Colonel, I need to know who was on duty in the SCIF 18 months ago, the night of March 15th. Harrison's face had gone from purple to white. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his tablet, accessing records that should have been destroyed or classified beyond anyone's reach. "I would have to check the logs," he said slowly. "I already did," Sarah replied. Her voice was ice, sharp and cold and absolute. "There were 4 people with access that night. Captain Robert Moore, who died in a vehicle accident 3 months later. Lieutenant James Davis, who was transferred to a posting in Germany and hasn't been heard from since. Sergeant Michael Williams, who is currently deployed overseas." She paused, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "And Deputy Director Victoria Hayes, who is sitting at this table right now." Every eye in the room turned to Victoria. The Deputy Director's expression remained perfectly composed. Not a flicker of surprise, not a hint of concern. Just that same, calm, controlled neutrality that Jack had seen in interrogation rooms when suspects knew they were caught but refused to give satisfaction. "Are you accusing me of treason, Lieutenant Monroe?" Victoria asked quietly. "I'm stating facts," Sarah said. "You were one of 4 people who could have received my warning. 3 of the others are either dead, missing, or conveniently unavailable. You're the only one still here, still in a position of power, still with access to operational intelligence." Sarah leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. "Convince me I'm wrong." "I don't have to convince you of anything." Victoria stood, gathering her papers with deliberate care. "You've been off the grid for years. You've been conducting unauthorized operations. Your mental state is, by your own admission, compromised. By the doctor's evaluation, unstable. By any reasonable standard, unreliable." She turned to Harrison. "Colonel Harrison, I want Lieutenant Monroe detained pending psychiatric evaluation and a full investigation into her activities. Charge her with conspiracy to commit defamation, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, whatever else you can think of. This briefing is over." "No." The word came from Jack, and it stopped everyone cold. He stood, positioning himself between Victoria and Sarah, his body language making it clear that anyone who wanted to get to Sarah would have to go through him first. "Chief Carter, you're out of line," Victoria said, her voice sharp for the first time. "With respect, Deputy Director, you're the one who's out of line." Jack's voice was quiet but carried the weight of 17 years of combat experience. "Lieutenant Monroe has provided credible intelligence about a threat to national security. Your response is to silence her and question her sanity. That's exactly what a mole would do." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Be very careful, Chief. Accusations like that can end careers." "I've been careful my entire career. Right now I'm being direct." Jack turned to address the rest of the room. "Lieutenant Monroe saved my team's lives less than 12 hours ago. She has years of intelligence that no one else has access to. She tried to warn us about a traitor and was ignored. The only question that matters right now is why." "Because she's unstable," Victoria said flatly. "Because her information can't be verified," another officer added. "Because you don't want it verified," Sarah said quietly. The accusation hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Victoria's composure finally cracked. Not much. A slight tightening around the eyes. A barely perceptible tension in her shoulders. Enough. Enough for Jack to see it. Enough for Sarah to see it. Enough to know they were right. "I have served this country for 23 years, Victoria said, her voice low and dangerous. "I have given everything. My marriage, my health, my entire life to protecting American interests. And I will not stand here and be accused of treason by a woman who spent years playing soldier in the mountains and a SEAL chief who's clearly too emotionally compromised to see straight." "Then prove us wrong," Sarah said, matching her tone. "Submit to a polygraph. Open your communications to review. Account for your whereabouts during the 17 compromised operations I documented." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "If you're innocent, you have nothing to hide. If you're guilty, we'll find out anyway. The only question is how many more people die before we do." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Jack's hand moved to his sidearm, not drawing it, just resting there. Ready. Waiting. Then Victoria turned to Harrison. "Colonel, arrest them both. Conspiracy to commit defamation. Unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Insubordination. Whatever charges will stick. Do it now." Harrison didn't move. "Colonel, I gave you an order." "With respect, Deputy Director," Harrison said slowly, his voice steady despite the way his hands shook. "I've been reviewing the same patterns Lieutenant Monroe identified. The correlation between compromised operations and your access to intelligence. I've had concerns for months. I just didn't have the evidence to voice them." Victoria's face went pale. "You're making a serious mistake." "Maybe," Harrison agreed. "I'm not going to be responsible for silencing the one person who might be able to prove what I've suspected." He nodded to the military police stationed at the door. "Deputy Director Hayes, you're being placed under administrative detention pending a full investigation. Please surrender your credentials and come with me." For a moment, Jack thought Victoria might resist. Her hand moved toward her jacket, reaching for something. A weapon, a phone, a way out. He tensed, ready to move. Then Sarah was there, faster than anyone could track. Her hand clamped down on Victoria's wrist with an iron grip, stopping the movement before it could complete. "Don't," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying more menace than any shout. "I've killed 121 people, Deputy Director. One more won't make a difference to me. It might make a difference to whatever's left of your soul." Victoria's eyes met Sarah's. Whatever she saw there made her go still, made her stop fighting, made her realize that the woman holding her wrist wasn't making threats. She was stating facts. "Fine," Victoria whispered. "You're wrong. You're all wrong. And when the truth comes out, you'll see." The MPs led her away. The room erupted in chaos, but Jack wasn't paying attention to any of it. He was watching Sarah, who had gone perfectly still, staring at the door through which Victoria had disappeared. "You knew," he said quietly. "You knew it was her before you walked into this room." "I suspected," Sarah replied, her voice distant. "I've been watching her communications for 18 months. The patterns were there. I needed her to react, needed to confirm it. That was a hell of a gamble. It was a calculated risk, the same kind of risk I've been taking for years." She finally turned to face him. "And if I'd been wrong, I would have kept looking. The mole exists, Jack. Victoria might be part of it, or she might be a dead end. Someone betrayed us. Someone is still betraying us." Her eyes hardened. "And I'm going to find them." "We're going to find them," Jack corrected. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "We're going to find them," she agreed. "Together." The interrogation of Victoria Hayes took 3 days. 3 days of lawyers and polygraphs and forensic analysis of communications that stretch back years. 3 days during which Sarah barely slept, barely ate, spending every waking moment reviewing evidence and building a case that would hold up under the intense scrutiny of multiple oversight committees. Jack stayed with her through all of it, bringing food she wouldn't eat, insisting on sleep she didn't take, watching as the woman he'd known transformed fully into something else, something harder, something that had forgotten how to be anything except a weapon pointed at enemies. On the morning of the 4th day, Harrison called them into his office. He looked like he'd aged a decade, gray circles under his eyes, deep lines in his face that hadn't been there before, the weight of command and betrayal pressing down on shoulders that had carried too much for too long. "She talked," he said without preamble. "Not a full confession. Her lawyers are too good for that. Enough to paint a picture." He pulled up a file on his computer, turning the screen so they could see. Victoria Hayes was recruited 20 years ago, a young analyst with access to sensitive information and a mountain of student debt. They offered her money. She took it, said it was supposed to be temporary, a few low-level leaks, nothing that would get anyone killed. Harrison's jaw tightened. Once you start, you can't stop. They owned her. Russians, Chinese, private intelligence firms, the lines blur after a while. She's been feeding information to multiple parties for 2 decades. The damage assessment is still ongoing, but we're talking hundreds of compromised operations, thousands of leaked documents, an intelligence breach that goes deeper than anything we've seen since the Cold War. Sarah was listening with that same still intensity Jack had come to recognize. The predator calculating, the hunter evaluating her prey. "What about the warning I sent?" she asked. "What happened to it?" She received it, recognized it as a threat to her operation, suppressed it before anyone else could see it. Harrison looked directly at Sarah. "She also put out a standing order to enemy forces in your sector. Anyone who encountered you was to eliminate you on sight. She wanted you dead, Lieutenant, wanted you buried so deep in those mountains that no one would ever find evidence of what you knew." "I didn't die," Sarah said quietly. "No, you didn't. And that's been her nightmare. Every day you survived was another day you could gather evidence, another day you could expose her. She's been living in fear that you'd eventually come down from those mountains with everything you needed to destroy her." Harrison closed the file. "Well, you came down, and you destroyed her. The recording of this briefing has been sent to 3 separate oversight committees and the Inspector General. By tomorrow morning, every relevant authority will have evidence of her activities. Her network is compromised. Her handlers know she talked. Her entire operation is burning." "Good," Sarah said. No emotion, no satisfaction, just cold acknowledgement of a mission accomplished. "What happens to her?" Jack asked. "That's above my pay grade. Between us?" Harrison leaned back in his chair. "I'd say her life expectancy just dropped significantly. The people she worked for don't forgive loose ends, and Victoria Hayes just became the loosest end in the intelligence community." He pulled out another folder. This one was thinner, darker. stamped with classifications that made Jack's clearance level seem almost quaint. Which brings me to you, Lieutenant Monroe. Harrison slid the folder across the desk. You have options. You could retire. God knows you've earned it. Disappear somewhere warm. Spend the rest of your life pretending none of this ever happened. That's not an option, Sarah said. I know, which is why I made some calls. Harrison nodded to the folder. Open it. Sarah opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with minimal information. A designation, a contact protocol, an authorization level so high that Jack couldn't actually see what it said. The text was redacted even from his security clearance. Phantom, Sarah read aloud. That's what they're calling you, Harrison said. It's a black program. Doesn't officially exist. Never will. You work when you choose. Disappear when you need to. No medals, no parades, no publicity. Just missions that can't officially happen and targets that can't officially be eliminated. He met her eyes. You'd still be a ghost, Lieutenant. Just one that decides when to be visible. Sarah stared at the paper for a long moment. Jack could see the war behind her eyes, the desire to be done fighting, the knowledge that she'd never truly be done, the understanding that some people were built for this work, and stepping away from it would be like asking the ocean to stop having tides. What about oversight? She asked finally. You report to one person, a director whose name you'll never know. She runs a collection of operators like you, specialists who work in the spaces between official operations. Ghosts hunting other ghosts. And if I say no, then you retire with full honors and our eternal gratitude. Lieutenant, Harrison's voice softened. You spent years doing exactly this kind of work. Unauthorized, unrecognized, unappreciated. This just makes it official, gives you the resources and support you should have had all along. Sarah closed the folder, looked at Jack, her eyes asking a question she couldn't voice. Jack nodded. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you decide, I'm here. You can't follow me into this, Jack. It's not that kind of program. I'm not following you. I'm standing beside you. There's a difference. He took her hand. You're not alone anymore, Sarah. You don't have to make this decision by yourself. She stared at their intertwined fingers. Years ago, she would have pulled away, would have rejected the offer of help as weakness, would have insisted on carrying every burden herself. Years had taught her something. Strength wasn't just about endurance. It was about knowing when to accept support, when to trust, when to let someone else share the weight. Okay, she said quietly. I'll do it. Harrison nodded, unsurprised. Good. Your first mission brief will be delivered within 48 hours. Until then, you're on medical leave. Rest. Recover. Remember how to be human for a few days. He stood, extending his hand. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, thank you. If you hadn't come back, Victoria Hayes would have operated for years longer, maybe decades. The damage would have been incalculable. Sarah shook his hand. The damage was already incalculable, Colonel. 43 dead, 17 compromised operations, years of my life. Her grip tightened. It's done now. Victoria is finished, and I'm going to make sure no one else has to fight the kind of war I fought. How? Harrison asked. Sarah released his hand and turned toward the door. By becoming the kind of ghost that hunts other ghosts, by using everything I learned in those mountains to protect the people who never knew I existed. She paused at the threshold. Someone has to watch the watchers, Colonel. Someone has to be the last line of defense when the system fails. And that someone is you? Sarah looked back over her shoulder. For just a moment, Jack saw the woman she'd been, the brilliant sniper, the dedicated officer, the person who'd sacrificed everything for her country without hesitation. He also saw who she'd become, the survivor, the hunter, the ghost who'd learned that sometimes the only way to protect people was to become something they feared. I'm Phantom, she said simply, and phantoms do the jobs no one else can do. She walked out into the afternoon sunlight. Jack followed, and together they moved through a world that had continued spinning without her. A world that was about to learn that some ghosts don't stay dead. They walked in silence for a while. The base was busy with afternoon drills and shift changes. Soldiers moving with purpose. Aircraft taking off and landing. The machinery of military life grinding forward with the same relentless momentum it had maintained for decades. Sarah watched it all with eyes that cataloged everything. Exits, sightlines, potential threats. Years of survival instincts didn't shut off just because she was technically safe. "You're still scanning," Jack observed. "I can't stop," she admitted. "Every person is a potential threat. Every window is a potential sniper position. Every vehicle is a potential car bomb. My brain won't turn off the threat assessment. It will, eventually, with time." "Will it?" She stopped walking, turning to face him. "Or is this just who I am now? The woman who can't walk through a crowd without plotting 3 different escape routes, who can't sleep without one hand on a weapon, who can't trust anyone except the one person who came back for her." Jack took her hands in his. "Then I'll be that person, for however long you need, until you can trust others again, until you can sleep without the nightmares, until you can look at a crowd and see people instead of threats." "That might take years, Jack." "Then it takes years. I'm not going anywhere." Sarah's eyes were bright, tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed, finally threatening to break through the iron control she'd maintained for so long. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be Sarah Monroe again. I've been Phantom for so long that I've forgotten who I was before." "Then don't be Sarah Monroe. Be whoever you are now. Be the woman who survived and came out stronger. Be the ghost who protects the living. Be Phantom." He pulled her closer. "Remember that even phantoms need someone to remind them they're human. Even ghosts need a home to haunt." She leaned her forehead against his chest. For a moment, she let herself be vulnerable. Let herself be held. Let herself remember what it felt like to not carry everything alone. "Take me somewhere normal," she said quietly. "Somewhere with terrible coffee and excellent pie. Somewhere I can sit and eat and pretend I'm just a person for an hour. I know just the place." They drove downtown in Jack's truck. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, watching the city scroll past. Seattle had changed. New buildings, new businesses. The same rain that had fallen when she left, still falling now. The world had moved on without her. Life had continued. People had lived and loved and died, while she'd been frozen in time in those mountains. The diner was exactly what Jack had promised. Old chrome and red vinyl. Coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the Reagan administration. Pie that made up for every other shortcoming with pure sugar and butter and nostalgia. They sat in a booth by the window. Sarah ordered cherry pie and coffee. Jack ordered the same. For a while, they just sat there, 2 warriors taking a moment to remember what peace felt like. "This is nice," Sarah said, taking a bite of pie. "Aggressively mediocre in the best possible way." Jack smiled. "Told you." "You did." She took another bite, chewed slowly, swallowed, set down her fork. "I lied earlier," she said quietly, "when I said I didn't enjoy killing them. When I said I didn't know if I was a monster." Jack waited. Let her find the words at her own pace. "I did enjoy it. Not the killing itself, but what it represented. Power, control, the ability to make the people who hunted me afraid for a change. For years I was running, hiding, surviving by being invisible. Last night I was visible. I was loud. I was death coming for them, and they couldn't stop me." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "That's what scares me, Jack. Not that I killed them, that I liked it. That some part of me, maybe a big part, wants to keep doing it. Wants to keep being Phantom because being Sarah Monroe means being vulnerable again. Means letting people close enough to hurt me. Means risking the kind of pain I felt when I thought I'd never see you again." Jack reached across the table and took her hand. Then we'll work on that. Together. You don't have to choose between being Phantom and being Sarah. You can be both. You can be the ghost who protects the living and the woman who learns to live again. You make it sound easy. It's not easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. It's possible, and you're the most capable person I've ever met. If anyone can figure out how to be human and weapon at the same time, it's you. Sarah squeezed his hand. Thank you, she said, for coming back for me, for believing I was alive when everyone else gave up, for being here now when I need someone to remind me why survival matters. Always, Jack said. That's not a promise, it's a fact. Like gravity or sunrise. I will always come back for you. They finished their pie in comfortable silence. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, two people who'd been broken by war began the slow process of learning how to be whole again. The weeks that followed were a study in contrasts. Sarah learned to sleep without her rifle, learned to walk through crowds without cataloging threats, learned to laugh at Jack's terrible jokes over mediocre coffee. She also learned that some scars don't heal, that some instincts don't fade, that the woman who'd survived alone couldn't simply disappear into normalcy like morning mist. She was Phantom now. The question was whether Phantom could also be human. 6 months later, a classified file landed on a desk in a building that officially didn't exist in a city that no map would acknowledge. The office belonged to a woman whose real name hadn't been spoken aloud in over a decade. She was the director of a program so secret that even knowing its designation could be considered a security breach. Her job was collecting ghosts, finding the operators who existed in the spaces between official records and giving them the missions that couldn't officially happen, targets that needed to be eliminated, threats that needed to be neutralized, problems that couldn't be solved through conventional channels. She opened the file. The designation read, Phantom. Below that, sparse details. Specialty, long-range precision elimination. Availability, on call. Current location, classified. Authorization level, black. Attached was a note in neat handwriting she recognized as belonging to Chief Jack Carter. She is not mine to command. She chooses her missions. I simply provide opportunities. Push her, and you'll lose her. Respect her, and you'll have the most effective operator you've ever fielded. The choice is yours. The director smiled slightly. She'd seen a lot of exceptional operators in her career. Specialists who could infiltrate anywhere, eliminate anyone, disappear without a trace. None of them had a file like this. None of them had spent years waging a one-woman war against an entire enemy network. None of them had come back from the dead with evidence that exposed a traitor who'd been operating for 2 decades. None of them were Sarah Monroe. She pressed a button on her desk. Her assistant's voice came through the speaker. Yes, ma'am. File Phantom as active. Deep cover. On-call status. No restrictions on deployment. Yes, ma'am. Any specific protocols? The director considered this. Sarah Monroe had survived the unsurvivable, had done the impossible so many times it had become routine, had proven that one person, properly motivated and impossibly skilled, could change the course of entire conflicts. Restrictions seemed almost insulting. None, she said finally. If we're calling her, it means we've run out of options. Let her work however she works best. Understood. Should we inform her commanding officer of her activation status? No. Phantom knows when she's needed. She'll appear when the time is right. The file went into a secure drawer alongside others marked Spectre, Wraith, Widow, Reaper, and a dozen more code names for operators who existed between the lines of official record. A collection of ghosts for impossible operations. A shadow network of the most dangerous people alive, all pointed at America's enemies. And now they had one more. The woman who'd spent years alone in the mountains and emerged not broken, but forged into something harder than steel and colder than ice. The drawer locked, The director returned to other matters. The machinery of the intelligence community ground forward as it always had. Wars were planned. Operations were executed. Enemies were eliminated. The world continued spinning with the same relentless momentum it had maintained for millennia. Somewhere in that world, in a place no satellite could find and no intelligence agency could penetrate, a woman with blonde hair and blue eyes was cleaning her rifle. The weapon was an extension of her body now, as familiar as her own heartbeat, as natural as breathing. Years of war had forged her into something new, something that could never truly go back to what she'd been before. She'd found something else in those mountains, something she'd thought was lost forever. A reason to keep fighting, a reason to come back, a reason to believe that even ghosts could find their way home. Her phone buzzed, a message from Jack. "Dinner tonight? That place with the terrible coffee is calling our names." Sarah smiled. The expression still felt strange on her face after years of wearing nothing but cold determination. It was getting easier, day by day, conversation by conversation, one small step at a time back toward humanity. She typed back, "I'll be there, but if the pie isn't as good as last time, I'm blaming you." She set down the phone and looked out the window at a world that had moved on without her. A world she was slowly learning to rejoin. A world that had no idea its safety depended on people like her. Watching from the shadows, waiting to pull the trigger when no one else could. The ghosts that protected the living, the phantoms that kept the darkness at bay. The warriors who came home not because the war was over, but because they'd finally won the right to choose their own battles. Sarah picked up her rifle one last time, ran her hand along the familiar metal. This weapon had been her only companion for years, her only friend, her only voice. Now she had other voices, other friends, other reasons to keep breathing. The rifle would always be there, waiting, ready, because that's what phantoms do. They wait in the shadows until they're needed. And when they're needed, they don't hesitate. They don't miss. They don't fail. Not Sarah Monroe, not Phantom. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Jack. It was an encrypted message on a frequency she'd been given 6 months ago, but never used. Until now. Operation Phantom activated. Target, Moscow. Asset requires immediate extraction. Author Operation Black. Departure 0400 hours. Sarah read the message 3 times. Then she stood, moving to her equipment locker. She began packing with the same methodical approach. She took out a small notebook and a pen. She began writing down the names of the people she needed to contact. She wrote down the addresses of the places she needed to go. She wrote down the phone numbers of the people she needed to call. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She wrote down the dates she needed to be there. She wrote down the times she needed to be there. She began packing with the same methodical precision she brought to everything. Each item chosen carefully, each piece of equipment tested and verified. Nothing left to chance, nothing risked on luck. Because luck was for people who didn't plan. And Sarah Monroe had spent years learning that survival wasn't about luck. It was about preparation, about skill, about being willing to do what others couldn't or wouldn't, about being a ghost when the world needed shadows. She sent a single message back, acknowledged, phantom en route. Then she sent another message, this one to Jack, just 3 words, Moscow, 3 days. The reply came immediately, I'll be waiting. She smiled again, picked up her rifle, walked out into the night that had become her home. Somewhere in Moscow, a traitor was sleeping, dreaming of safety, believing the shadows couldn't reach across continents and through walls to find them, believing they were untouchable. They were wrong, because the shot that had echoed through the Rocky Mountains 6 months ago had asked a question. Who fired that shot? Now the world knew the answer, and the world would never forget. Sarah Monroe, lieutenant, sniper, ghost, phantom, the woman who died and came back, the warrior who spent years alone and emerged stronger, the ghost who hunted other ghosts in the spaces between official records and classified operations. She was Phantom, and phantoms don't stay dead. They don't forgive. They don't forget. And when they return from the shadows, they don't miss. Not ever. The night swallowed her whole, and somewhere in the darkness, death was already counting down the hours until it reached Moscow. Precise, inevitable, absolutely certain, just like the woman who delivered it.